What's up, guys? So, Just A Contrarian back with some contrarian stuff. Guaranteed this is probably gonna annoy some people. Others gonna be like, duh, of course, duh. But we'll see. In any case, I invite the comments. Iced coffee. Thank you to people who contribute to my journey by contributing to my buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com. In any case, so I am a nerd. You can see. Look at the Batman stuff behind me. Look at all the little Funko Pops, the Gizmo, the Batman, other stuff, the little martial arts stuff. Um, but I'm not just a geek in that sense of a nerd. I'm also an academic nerd, right? My favorite subjects are, science, philosophy, history, a little bit art. And to be more specifically, I consider myself a behavioral science nerd. I love, you know, looking at behavioral research, cognitive research, psychology, linguistics, philosophy, particularly analytic philosophy, logic, philosophy of mathematics, all that sort of geeky stuff. But in psychology, I think my favorite domain of psychology, or at least one of them, is psychometrics, which is the study of like standardized testing and stuff like that. When you get into things like IQ and SATs and all that sort of stuff, psychometrics. So, the old standard of psychometrics was that the IQ tests just reflect whatever whatever the test is being administered to people. That has changed since psychology has had a paradigm shift 60 years ago, where it went from a behaviorist paradigm. The behaviorist paradigm basically saw the role of psychology as studying and predicting just people's behavior, and that that the mind, or mental processes, weren't an avenue for scientific research. They have shifted out of that to the new paradigm, cognitivism. Cognitivism basically says we can study not just people's behavior, but the underlying mental processes. Um, so, and this started with people like Noam Chomsky and the philosopher Jerry Fodor, who are basically the founders of cognitive science, which took from sort of a plethora of academic domains: psychology, linguistics, philosophy, neurobiology, zoology, and other related things. In any case, what am I getting at? So that is to say that now we don't look at IQ tests as merely measuring whatever is being administered on the IQ test. Rather, we believe that IQ test actually measures general intelligence. General intelligence is a both quantifiable human trait and a cognitive ability. Okay. And we believe that general intelligence, as well as other cognitive abilities, are a form of information processing by the mind. Because under the cognitivist, paradigm, we basically see the mind akin to sort of a computer, more or less. Why am I saying this? So, I think when you look at societal problems today, this gives us a look at it that maybe some people ignore in popular mass media and in all these little points that people make online and in social media spaces, because most of them don't actually have a background in scientific psychology. Most of them know pop psychology, and they'll talk about stupid stuff and use psychology terms out of reference, talking about gaslighting and narcissist this and all sorts of dumb stuff. Usually women. Yeah, I'm gonna be blunt, but in any case, why am I saying this? So, a hugely controversial book that's probably forgotten now, by except by older people, was a book called The Bell Curve by Charles Murray and Richard Herrnstein. The book was controversial because it basically shed light on something that's well known within psychological and specifically psychometric research, which is different groups have different average IQs, and that unfortunately, like say, some groups have IQs lower than others, but that didn't mean that those people were worth less because of their average IQ, nor did it mean that that any individual within that group was necessarily had a lower IQ. It just was a reflection of the average IQ of the entire group, but there's going to be greater individual differences. There's going to be more variance within groups than between groups. Okay, and aside from the racial controversy, most of what they shared in that book wasn't controversial. That was one chapter in that book. So most of the people hating the book didn't read the majority of it, because that was one chapter out of the whole book. And even within that controversial chapter, they still believed that the lower IQ for certain groups like Black people and others could be rectified through social change. However, the two authors disagreed on how much social engineering should go into rectifying that problem, because again, the IQ test isn't the problem, it's just identifying a problem. That's what standardized tests do. One author was a libertarian, the other one was conservative. So the conservative guy was actually more he was more accepting of more in government interventions to help, whereas the libertarian was like, well, no, let's just let we shouldn't let the government intervene too much in our daily lives to affect change. So they were standing on their two political biases, but they admit their political biases in the book, so they're very honest. And another thing was that even with the IQ differences, when you look at the data, they actually made it so that the differences weren't as great as what the data actually showed, because of the controversy. Because there were psychometricians who were actually saying you guys were being too generous. So in any case, one of the things that they predicted in the book, aside from the racial differences in IQ, which is just a fact, that's not a sorry, was that when the average IQ of the general population goes down, we'll see more societal problems. And indeed, that is the case, as was predicted in 1994 by this book. There's a thing called the Flynn effect. The Flynn effect was a phenomenon by the person with that very name, Dr. Flynn, who discovered that each successful generation does better on the IQ test than previous generations. And some people thought, well, does that mean that each generation is getting smarter? No, because if that were the case, that would mean that our human ancestors were dumb as a brick. And that's obviously not the case. We've had people in ancient times who were brilliant. I mean, you can go back to, ancient Greece and Rome, or ancient China, ancient India, ancient Egypt, and find people who would today will be considered, of gifted intelligence. So it's not that. Why people have been doing better on the IQ test in each successful generation, according to the Flynn effect, is that people have gotten better at analytical reasoning, which is tested on these IQ tests. People have gotten better at it because of better education and because society standards have put in heavy emphasis on the ability to have analytical reasoning, whereas most people would be better at just holistic reasoning, right? And so each successful generation, the IQ tests have to be renormalized for that general population. However, what was discovered around the same time that this book was published is something called the reverse Flynn effect. The reverse Flynn effect is the phenomenon whereby the newer generations today are actually performing worse than previous generations. That doesn't mean they're necessarily dumber. It means that they're not as good at abstract reasoning as people of my generation and older, sorry. Where am I getting with this? So again, predicted in the bell curve by Murray and Herrnstein was that we'll see societal problems as the average IQ of the general population drops. We'll also see that a lot of people will be more invested in frivolous things like entertainment and today's social media. We see that happening. And we're going to see a rise of the cognitive elite, which we do. So nowadays, the most successful people are like the people in Silicon Valley and others. We no longer have an aristocracy in this country of rich twits. Nowadays, the most successful people tend to be the smartest and most talented people, which is the cognitive elite. So that was definitely a successful prediction, as was the reverse Flynn effect. We are seeing that happen, and we're seeing societal problems as a result of that. And this gets to the crux of what I want to say. The reason why college campuses seem so cooked nowadays, that is why the students seem just less well adapted socially, and just college campuses seem completely intolerant, which is anathema to what high academia used to represent, is because the college students aren't as smart anymore. Or let me be nice. Let me put it this way. They are better. They don't reason abstractly very well as to prior generations. When I entered college in the late 90s, the average IQ of a college student was 115, with the average IQ of a college graduate being 120. If you had gotten a 500 on the verbal portion of the SAT back then, that kind of predicted that your IQ was around 120. Okay. Where are we today with that? Well, and again, you can fact check me on that. That comes from the American Psychological Association, or you can go to the Association for Psychological Science, the two big organizations when it comes to scientific psychology. So go ahead and fact check me on that. Where's the average IQ of that today? So now the average IQ of a college student is 102 compared to 115 in the past. And the average IQ of a college graduate is 112. If you don't see, so that's a whole centile difference from the past. And the fact that it's decreased so sharply points to a few things. One is there's the reverse Flynn effect. But also, I'm going to be fair and say that there's a larger pool of people attending college than, uh, say, 30 years ago. So there's that as well. So you're going to get a variance in intellectual ability amongst a wider pool of people attending college. But you can't ignore the fact of such a precipitous drop in average IQ for a college student. And that kind of gets to why some of these people are so cooked. I guarantee the people who are in STEM fields are still high performing on IQ tests. And they're going to be the ones least likely being intolerant on campuses because they're making moves. Whereas the ones taking gender studies and stupid bullshit majors like that are going to be the ones always protesting, always being just obnoxious on campuses. Um, we know the type for us college goers. Uh, and that's not to say that all protesters are stupid. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the folks who are like have nothing better to do but to be intolerant of others, needing safe spaces, and needing trigger warnings in lectures dealing with social science and stuff like that. These are the less intellectually gifted folks amongst the college population. And this is why college campuses kind of suck today, because they have lesser talented students attending. Thank you for my TED Talk.